Want to break into real estate or expand your deal flow in South Florida? BRIC, the Black Real Estate Investment Council, based in Miami, is where investors, developers, and lenders meet to move projects forward. Backed by the Black Professionals Network, BRIC is bringing the city's brightest minds together to build smarter. Check out what's happening at mybpn.org/BRIC.
On this episode of Create the Village.
The house changes for all kinds of reasons. That change kind of flows across the whole business like a wrecking ball. Higharc actually just automates the flow of that change.
This is Create the Village, a podcast about the intersection of public policy and community development.
My name is Egbert Perry. I'm the CEO and founder of the Integral Group, a real estate company that focuses on creating value in cities and rebuilding the fabric of communities. Home building is one of the largest sectors in the U.S. economy, yet it remains one of the slowest to evolve. While industries from manufacturing to media have embraced digitization and automation, the way we design and construct homes remains remarkably manual, fragmented, and inefficient. And that inefficiency isn't just a technical challenge, it's one of the hidden drivers of our growing affordability crisis. If we want to build smarter, more inclusive communities, we need to rethink the entire system, from conception to completion. That's where Higharc comes in. In today's episode, Jordan Jones, who leads Integral's work in the Carolinas, speaks with Marc Minor, co-founder and CEO of Higharc, a company using software to reimagine how homes are designed, customized, and delivered. Higharc is helping builders reduce cycle times, cut costs, and respond more nimbly to market demands without sacrificing quality or design integrity. Jordan and Marc dive deeply into where the industry is falling short, how digital tools can unlock new efficiencies, and what it will take to bring home building into the 21st century. Let's listen in after this message from our sponsors.
If you're working in communities that have been underserved for decades, you know the numbers don't tell the whole story. That's where the Ascent Project comes in. TAP brings high-impact community programs directly into housing developments, helping stabilize neighborhoods, build buy-in, and reduce investor risk. Curious how it works? Visit theascentproject.org to explore partnership options.
As Atlanta grows, thousands of residents are being priced out of their own neighborhoods. The Atlanta Land Trust offers a solution, a community land trust model that preserves affordability, promotes wealth building, and resists displacement. With a focus on long-term impact and equity, ALT is redefining what sustainable urban development looks like. Explore the model at atlantalandtrust.org.
Welcome to Create the Village. Today we're joined by Marc Minor, the co-founder and CEO of Higharc, a company that's bringing much-needed innovation to the home building industry. Marc has spent his career solving complex problems through technology, whether it's 3D printing or now the way we build homes. At Higharc, Marc is leading a push to automate and streamline the home building process, tackling everything from construction efficiency to workforce shortages. In places like the Carolinas, where demand for housing is high and affordability is a growing concern, this kind of innovation has never been more relevant. Today we'll talk about the opportunities, the challenges, and the vision for a future where technology makes housing more affordable, building more efficient, and innovation more accessible for developers, builders, and buyers. Marc, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So starting with the big picture, Marc, the home building industry has been really slow to change, as we all know. What made you really think about this space and look at the space and think, how can we do better?
Yeah, in a word, I was the buyer. So I was trying to build a house. And at the same time, I was working in advanced manufacturing. I worked for 3D printing as an industry, but for digital manufacturing more broadly. And that's a world where efficiency is a kind of non-negotiable. And the more upstream you can move decisions in the value chain, the better. So software is being used really heavily to enable more informed decisions and better design and tighter processes from the beginning. So that was my backdrop when I went to build a house in North Carolina. And it was kind of like a tale of two cities, you know? On the one hand, we're at a place in manufacturing where algorithms are being used to actually help product designers to figure out what's the performance versus price trade-off for a given part, even going so far as to simulate manufacturing processes and optimize the design based on those. Meanwhile, trying to figure out, can I build on this site? What could I build? What might it cost? How might I balance my budget with what I want? And realizing that it's really completely manual, driven by a bunch of really talented but individual specialists, none of whom own the whole thing outside of a full service architect. And so to me, it was like very frustrating, first of all, as a buyer, but secondly, very eye-opening at how straightforward the application of digital manufacturing sort of software approaches could be to home building if done in the right way. So that was about 7.5 years ago. We've been going hard since then to bring something like that to market.
Yeah, that must have been pretty polarizing, right? Going from that background of advanced manufacturing to the home building process, right? Lack of transparency, lack of efficiency in decision-making process, right? Not position you all to be successful as you all are thinking about making your decisions of kind of cost, square footage, et cetera, in that process.
Well, the hardest thing is that most buyers don't even really know where to start with considering building a new house. They have this kind of consumer-like assumption that there's going to be a turnkey service for them that allows for them to compare options and within their price range and understand the trade-offs. And the reality is that you have to hire a handful of people simply to shop, just to make that kind of experience possible, exploring this versus that, right? And these are like buyers who don't even really need or care about a truly custom house, right? They just kind of want something that feels sort of like something else that they've seen. That's just a very hard thing to get after for a lot of good reasons in our industry. So for me, it was definitely like pretty striking how manual it was, but also how unavailable the industry was for a buyer who wasn't ready to plunk down, tens of thousands of dollars in commitment before they made a decision. And I think that's really what we're about as a company, pulling a lot of the understanding of what can you build, how to build it, real upstream. So that's where we started. It was very kind of like, how can we integrate what the builder needs, what the design side needs, and what the buyer needs into a single web-based piece of software. Where we've gone since then is obviously much more about serving home builders and helping them to do a better job serving their buyers.
And are you all primarily helping home builders in the single family space, or is there any interest from townhomes or, kind of missing middle? And what's your specific focus today?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the US, there's about 1 million houses built every year, right? Single family houses. So that's where our focus is today. Increasingly, townhomes are getting thrown into the mix for even typically detached single family home builders. It's just the reality of sort of the input costs and land availability is driving a lot of that. And so certainly townhomes, something we see a lot of, but today we don't work with multifamily. At least we don't do that yet. So you probably know that we have a handful of outstanding investors who do have a big portion of their business focused on mixed use and multifamily, like Starwood is one of them. RXR is another one.
That's great. And are there particular states where you're starting to see more traction with home builders and others these days? And if so, where do you think might be driving the various market?
Yeah. So when you look at home building, it's there's like an inverse relationship between home building and amount of regulation, in the US and land availability. So land availability, regulation, and number of homes are all related. So the Southeast, there's just a ton of home building happening, and that's where our focus is. Midwest is up next. And then lesser degree, the Pacific Northwest and the West. The demand is certainly there in the West. The challenge is the regulatory environment.
Yeah, you definitely hit on several times already, right? The the increasing cost of land is not becoming more and more available to land decreasing. Are you all playing a role in helping home builders think through yet kind of more of a planning approach or kind of best way to optimize the land for unit layouts?
Well, the way to think about Higharc is as a kind of product platform for managing homes as products more efficiently with a better buyer experience. Most builders build homes sort of with a product-like approach, right? They're production builders. The word product is in there for a reason. And those are the builders we serve today. We help them be more flexible when they're considering land opportunities. So today, many builders might pass on land opportunities because it's just too hard for them to design new product for those land opportunities, or too hard to modify their existing product for those land opportunities. Where we fit in is we help them to more easily design and develop and bring new product to market. And we really help them make it real simple to adapt existing product to new markets. And so in that regard, there is a direct line to land acquisition and planning, but we're not that's not really where we start or focus on. The other area that we've seen the land side be interested in what we can provide is kind of visualization. So when they're working on entitlements or they're working on closing a deal, it's a competitive situation. When you can visualize a community before it's built with a kind of photoreal walkthrough that actually uses the real model homes that you've got, it just allows you to present a much more compelling case. And so we produce those as part of what we offer.
And so from a housing affordability perspective, right, this is a more and more bigger issue, particularly here in the Southeast, as you've talked about, markets we're operating in, particularly Charlotte, Charleston, and the Raleigh-Durham area, right? You talked about how your software platform helps kind of simplify a lot of these processes. How well are you all seeing it and viewing this technology as ways to help reduce costs and make homes more accessible to people who need them?
Well, there's just a lot of opportunity for improving the efficiency of home building. So it's an opportunity-rich environment. That said, getting your hands around one of those opportunities and kind of following it through is difficult because our industry is systematic, meaning there's systems of people, there's the vendors, suppliers, subcontractors, subs of subs, there's the GCs. They're all interrelated, and affecting change that trickles down to the costs of the house can be challenging because complex systems of systems are hard to move. And so the way that Higharc sort of feeds into that problem is really by, I like to describe it as creating a kind of rising tide effect for the kind of value chain, right? Across the different parts of the business. If we can make it easier for a change to the building to make its way across that whole value chain, then you have a kind of rising tide effect that actually, it shows up in a reduction of cycle time, right? It shows up in a reduction in variance, So there's less mistakes in the field. And when a mistake does happen, it doesn't keep happening house to house. You can fix it upstream quickly and push it back downstream. And so that's really the way we see Higharc impacting the cost of the house, right? It's by tightening up the operation of the builder and their subs, simply by producing better, more accurate, more real-time data about the building and sort of what needs to be purchased and built. And that's what's unique about Higharc, right? We replace AutoCAD and Revit in our industry, but we don't simply stay in the design side of the business. The whole point of our software is that when you have a plan in Higharc, that plan actually becomes like a little piece of software itself that automatically gives every other part of the value chain what they need. So if you need key measures, right, takeoffs, the plan gives it to you. You don't have to go and sort of manhandle it like a BIM model to get what you need out of it, right? And you don't have to have someone who knows Revit or Higharc, in this case, on the studio side. The design, you don't have to have a professional, designer or drafter in order to get data. There's a whole separate interface that grabs data down for the estimating team. Same thing for the sales and marketing team, right? Today, the way it works is you get drawings, basically incomplete representations of a building, and then you send those to some art firm, third-party art firm, and they have to sort of transform those into their best shot of what the house is going to look like. It takes a lot of rounds of feedback and revision with the marketing and sales team before you're actually correct. And by the time you get out there, it's usually wrong and incomplete because they can't represent all the choices. Higharc's just a view on the model because we're web-based. The 3D model of your house in that location automatically produces a sales experience. So the whole point is when a house changes, and it needs to change all the time. Houses are products, right? You roll them out in many places at once, but they change every time they get built. Like the garage might be on the opposite side. You might have a different mix of materials or elevations. The buyers might choose different structural options, wraparound porch, rear patio, whatever. The house changes for all kinds of reasons. That change kind of flows across the whole business like a wrecking ball. Higharc actually just automates the flow of that change. And that's really how we make a difference.
From this automation you talk about, right, really kind of trying to optimize the entire process. Time clearly appears to be something you are helping the different vendors kind of involved in these different systems. From a time perspective, is there kind of a number with the data you will have, kind of you talk about kind of potential savings, particularly from a production home builder perspective?
Yeah. Well, so one of the more interesting is we've seen a consistent ROI for builders is the time it takes to launch a new community. So when you're launching a new community, there's a lot of product development and design work that ends up going into effectively like adapting existing product, existing plans for the needs of that community. And we've seen that go down by 75%, pretty consistent. So like 120 days down to 30 days. It's pretty remarkable. And then the other big area we've seen kind of consistently in time reduction is soft cycle time. This is the time between when a buyer goes to contract and when you get your permit. And so we've seen that go down by 30%.
Those are some significant savings helping us, again, just decrease carrying costs, decrease likely in helping address housing affordability. I'm also
here's a quick quote from a sales director of a builder in the Midwest. Higharc cuts the sales process in half from start to finish. If you don't get on board with this type of technology, you're going to be left in the dust. We hear this all the time. So it's really interesting. Like there's a bunch of different areas of a business that can be affected by this kind of integrated product software. But the key is that it's like a rising tide, over time. The more you sort of transform the business using a platform like this that puts your products at the center of your business, the more it can influence your operations in every part of the business.
And I'm curious as well, right? You all are looking then to automate this process, right? Today it's been very manual. You talk about very disconnected. I'm curious, as you all are working with home builders, right? You're providing them this new data, this new approach to thinking about construction, for example. Is this model providing them the opportunity to think about, right, adjustments to the supply chain or thinking about opportunities for additional innovation in the space for them to have a better understanding of how to, right, virtually think through kind of changes in the process and how it could impact the overall supply chain and the construction process?
Yeah, I mean, that's the law. So when you zoom out and you look at the influence we want to have on the industry long run, it's all about producing better homes at a lower price, right? Better homes in this case means a lot of things, but to your question, it's about a tighter integration between the specification, the engineering, and the purchasing and construction of the building. So suppliers, subcontractors, and the builder working together around more accurate information in order to tighten up the estimate. So there's a few ways we're seeing this happen today, and I'm more excited about what's going to happen over the next couple of years as we work closely with our partners. So today, one of the things that we see a lot with builders is there's not a ton of value engineering that's possible until you've built a house a whole bunch of times. And even then, because the business changes so fast, a lot of your ideas end up staying in the realm of ideas. It's like a backlog of stuff we should do, but we don't have the time or the ability to do because it means modifying often hundreds of drawings. So like value engineering of homes and doing it in a way that actually is responsive to the field is something that we've seen a lot of. And that can mean simply better performing buildings, but it can also mean faster cycle times and reduced error rate and reduced order size for like lumber, for example. The other area that I think has been really interesting is in prototyping. So a lot of builders will actually physically prototype homes, they walk the houses, get a sense for the feel on the design side, and they'll make modifications. And a big part of that resides in the reality that 90% or more of all houses are still designed in AutoCAD. right? And in 2D, it's mainly 2D drafting that they're using. And so they have to, spend sometimes months in a design cycle before they're at a place where they can get proper feedback by physically prototyping the thing. So what we've seen is that sort of stack getting way collapsed, where because Higharc works you can design a house in a day if you really wanted to in Higharc, and type it in 3D, walk it with your crew virtually, and modify it by sort of moving that sort of prototyping from physical to virtual way upstream. It's actually kind of allowing builders to just move a lot faster and make better decisions upstream. I should mention, like, the interesting thing about home building is, like, there's a whole lot of innovation that has found its way to the field in commercial that really has not found its way into home building. And this is one of them, like virtual site walks, and like MEP coordination is not even a thing in home building for the most part. Like, there's no clash detection. Like, that's not the way it works. Do you know what I mean? HVAC systems are typically like, hey, the sub's got that, and that's going to be field designed. Do you know what I mean? So there's just a lot of opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, my wife and I also built a house relatively recently ourselves, and so I could see those clashes happening on site. Right, the superintendents are trying to work with the subs as right they're already laying their duct or their pipes, and you can just see the conflicts coming in place. And so, right, I've seen that myself personally in the last few years. Right, it also makes me think about the commercial construction phase, commercial multifamily. Right, there's more of a shift, or at least conversation these days around offsite construction, whether that's prefab or modular construction, whereas single-family home is still primarily on-site construction with your framers on site, et cetera. How are you all trying to think about the efficiencies of offsite construction, helping facilitate or bring that to the typical on-site construction, right? I'm assuming primarily your data, right? Your data can help your subcontractors understand truly the number of nails needed for the different number of pieces of sheetrock and help them kind of plan through and coordinate their logistics.
So Higharc, unlike Revit, so Revit requires many humans spending a lot of hours doing a lot of modeling in order to get to the place that you're talking about, just to produce. And it's still a bit of like a red herring, getting to true kind of bills of materials with a Revit model. Do you know what I mean? Higharc was built first and foremost with the goal of providing data about the houses to the industry, and then secondarily almost as a sort of design specification tool. And the value that brings is that the models that you design in Higharc are data driven. So you can actually create your construction standards, your purchasing constraints, your supplier relationships, your catalogs in an independent part of Higharc, right? You can say in this region, these are the standards for the exterior wall framing, and then we can automatically enforce those standards onto the model, which is really, really neat. That means the sort of drafting modifications and the way it flows down to data happens automatically. And one of the things that actually does is it creates the opportunity for the kind of discussions that you're talking about to happen using real information. And so that's, I would say, like the beginning of, or an illustration of of the thread we're going to be pulling on as we continue to grow the business. It's really all about having this truly accurate and complete set of data about every house that can be changed automatically using software. This is the key. You have to be able to make one decision once and have it automatically change maybe hundreds of designs all at once. That's what's really critical. And that's what's powerful about Higharc.
Absolutely. And this is definitely a new way for home builders to think about approaching what they've been doing for decades. So I'm curious, from a resistance to change perspective of some of these home builders, particularly, been doing this for decades, if not generations, right? Some of these family-owned businesses. How are you all looking to help some of these home builders think about that resistance to change and helping them think about overcoming that resistance?
It's real, and it's real for a really good reason. Home building companies, particularly production home building companies, they're like manufacturing lines, a bunch of assembly lines where everybody in the company works on the line. So you reach a point where you're like, man, oh man, we need to upgrade these lines. We need to upgrade the machines. We need to make our lines more efficient. On the other hand, how do we do that? We can't take the business down. We can't stop the lines in order to upgrade them. So I think that's a really fair like problem and fair concern that folks in the industry have. What we've ended up doing is kind of saying, hey, we're going to staff a team. We have a whole team of drafters and architects on staff and builders on staff. And we're going to kind of stand up a line with you, running side by side with your current line, and we're going to help you hop over. And that's made a big difference. So I think on the one hand, taking the problem off their hands for the beginning, helping them get up and running without them having to stop their day jobs is an important tool. The other one is successful customers. Higharc has had to take a few years to work with a handful of customers to make them really successful. That way, others in the industry know that they're not the first, that this is already proven and successful. So we've had thousands of houses get built using the construction documents that we automatically produce. It's really neat. And we're at the place now where we've got real stories for them to tell. And so those two things together, I think, make a pretty enormous difference for being willing to change. The final one, really, actually, I should add, is allowing for time to do its work,
No, all that makes complete sense, right? As we think about these companies, to your point, right, focused on this production side, they're comfortable with what they do, and any changes in their process and their approach simply introduces new risk, right? Those changes could hopefully have strong benefit to them, but right, to your point, is it takes time to help them understand that risk, understand how to look at that risk a little bit differently, and your team can help onboard them, so to speak, and show them that the process, right, you all thought through the different pieces of the risk and help them identify those benefits, overcome those challenges, and be willing to kind of make that investment.
You got it.
Yeah, that's very helpful. As you think about Higharc long term, curious kind of what do you see as the future of home building based on the technology you're bringing, other technologies in the field, right? Where do you anticipate home building could be? And I'm just curious, 10 to 20 years down the road.
Well, in the US, we've got to have innovation on the business model side in order to unlock innovation on the parts and pieces and methods side, So modular, prefab, things happening offsite so that you can build buildings with less of an impact from the environmental conditions. All that's good, but it's really not finding its way into the market because the economics just don't work. And so I do think in the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be a new construct for building houses that potentially, I'm just like an imaginative possibility that I have no evidence for yet, but where there's some kind of integration, economic alignment of incentives between supplier, manufacturer, trade, and landowner. I think there has to be more alignment between those, because the only way to reduce the cost of the building and improve the quality is through standardization and of materials, of processes, and that means elimination of labor. It's the only way to do it. And so I think if you get the labor force involved, like economically aligned with the forces of innovation. So for example, a supplier, distributor, panel maker, let's call it, panel factory, just as an example of a component. If you get those guys aligned, if the trades work there effectively, right? And they also install, this is the key bit, then you have an alignment of incentives. And I think you don't do any kind of meaningful change in our industry without changing the way trades work. We're losing the skilled trades, and there's lots of innovation. Don't get me wrong, unquestionably, there's going to be a software layer for our industry that doesn't exist today. You need that to do everything else. You can't do modular really unless you have a new way of designing and modifying buildings. So we're not going to go to a world where every house is the exact same. That's never going to happen. And so when you can't 100% standardize, you have to have a method for managing standardization flexibly. That's what software does. So software with robotically controlled kind of factories where there's a kind of CAD to CAM pathway, just like in manufacturing, CAD to CAM, right? Where you have a software layer that translates the version of a building model to a standardized factory setup. You need that, right? And then you need that in an economically aligned way with the cost of a house, which means producing probably somewhat close to where you're building, trades aligned with the with the supplier distribution side, and probably something around the landowner, like whether it's unclear to me exactly how that ends up working out, but it's a super complex system, home building is, and there's not a silver bullet, right? And I think so much of the complexity that needs to be solved is in the systems side of things. So business innovation is so important.
No, very much appreciate you sharing your thoughts there, and be willing to go out, right? And think 20 years out, right? We don't know where it's going to be, but to your point here is the complexity of the systems, all the coordination that happens to all the different subcontractors, right? Demobilizing from one site to another site and kind of the lags between doing so. To your point, kind of referencing earlier, is kind of the cycles there between doing so. That's a very helpful approach and thinking there. So I do agree as well that the offsite construction is just not at a scale today, even for my team, as we're doing a lot of kind of more commercial multifamily developments. We still aren't seeing it there, the values there yet. And I'm sure the lack of density of the single family home is still not right, even going to be there in 5 to 10 years. But there is something there in terms of standardization, something there in terms of thinking about optimizing the pricing, optimizing the efficiency, bringing down labor costs, and just trying to make it easier for teams to get in and out and to each job as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Well, can we talk about this for one more second? Because this is super interesting. Yeah? Okay. So just to elaborate, there are like robotics as a category is having a Cambrian moment on some level because of the commodity prices of sensing and the sort of state of computer vision as it is today. Anyone has access to world-class computer vision libraries. And so there's sort of drywall machines, there's, bricklaying machines, there's all kinds of interesting approaches to thinking about field-based robotics. There's probably something there, but it never happens unless you integrate it with the trades or find some way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
But when you look at the cost of the building, the place to pull is from the cost of construction.
Yep.
And you're not going to do it by reducing the cost of the materials much more. Like those are already pretty reduced, actually, right? Another way to do it is replacement of material types. So I'm super interested in, who knows what's going to happen in terms of the commodities here, but a replacement of wood frame buildings, or at least having that as a more, like during COVID, it was really interesting. A lot of folks were like, oh, should I look at aluminum frame buildings? Do you remember this? It's really interesting. And that unlocks a whole new way of value engineering and designing and building these things. And I think there's something really there. I wouldn't count out modular and prefab if we can unlock the economics. The economics are the problem, and scale is obviously the underlying factor there. So certainly I think there's a path for software to unlock scale, access to scale, and I hope that we're a part of that. But there are other paths. The last thing I want to say, which I'm really interested in, is distribution. There's also I think there's a lot of opportunity in optimized distribution and last mile delivery, kitting of parts, that kind of thing, which when you have the right software layer and the ability to demand plan and a connection directly to manufacturers, you can imagine a world where working like large distributors or manufacturers with large distributors can do drop shipping for many categories of goods on a job site by job site basis. So you could imagine, like you've seen what's happened with like the Amazon's version of Uber for delivery for their last mile, where you can kind of sign up to be a driver. You can imagine the same kind of thing is going to take place eventually for many categories of building goods, where as long as you can trust the system you have a system like Amazon has for ensuring there's last mile capability. And if you have the right visibility to the demand, you can cut out a lot of waste in the distribution. I think those are things we're going to see as well.
Agreed. And I would say, right, Amazon has that visibility into the data itself, visibility of what happened last holiday year, right? And that simply is missing from the construction industry today. And so without that data, the reliable acknowledgement of what that demand is going to be, it's hard to make those large fixed investments in those type of robotics that could drive that efficiency further, and therefore preventing us from seeing those gains in the industry today.
It's so cool, though. The hard thing about being an entrepreneur and working on something that all the way through is you always want to do a million things at once. Like I would love to sort of in any way be a part of all these little things. It's just so fun. It's such an awesome place to be in our industry at this time of history, with technology becoming so available in so many different ways.
And I would add, it's not only fun, but it's where we need to be spending our time. Right? As we think about the affordability challenges that are affecting all of our communities, it's happening across all of our income spectrums. That we need more and more entrepreneurs like yourself, Mark, to continue to spend your time in this space. So thank you, Mark, for joining us. Thank you, Mark, for sharing your perspective on how technology can address some of the biggest challenges in home building today. It's clear that tools like Higharc don't just save time, they create opportunities for smarter, more efficient housing solutions, especially in places like the Carolinas, where the need is so great.
Jordan, you're a busy guy, have a lot on your plate, so I particularly appreciated you having the time or taking the time to meet with Marc Minor. Very good conversation. I always appreciate when, for us real estate types, the conversation seems to go down a slightly different vein because you get tired of talking about the same old same thing every time. And so this conversation opened up a fascinating window into what's possible when we rethink home building really from the ground up, something we probably desperately need to do anyway, given the evolution and current state of the industry.
Yeah, for me, my time with Mark was very relatable as well. Mark talked about the beginning of our conversation about the challenges he faced when he did his own single-family custom home building experience. And my wife and I went through a very similar process. So I was very excited for this conversation, very excited about how he is looking to shift a lot of the decisions upstream, and that he's looking to kind of change how home building is done. It's not just about shaving time. It's about how do we really rethink how we're building homes today. So it was a really great conversation.
No question. And as I said, you're right. He wasn't just pushing for pace, like faster construction. He was talking about it needing to be fairer, more affordable, smarter, etc. So he's thinking about the end, and with the end in mind, what can we do in the process, engineering and re-engineering the process to get us to that end. And that's what I appreciated. And quite frankly, that's the forward thinking that the industry needs. I made I sort of signal to the need for change in the industry. And that's because we all know that we're still building, at least here in the States, we're building the same way we've been building for the last couple hundred years. So the industry really has not evolved quite the way a lot of other industries have evolved, taking advantage of technology and other kinds of disruptions to change itself. So that's what I'm alluding to when I say I appreciated what Mark was trying to do from a forward-thinking perspective.
Yeah, that mindset he brings really is, to your point, Egbert, of re-examining the assumptions we've been carrying forward from generations of doing the same processes is kind of what the moment in which we find ourselves operating in, where costs are only going up, interest rates aren't coming down anytime soon. It really calls for that mindset of re-examining assumptions. As I think we all know, policy alone won't be able to help us address housing affordability 100%. So we're really dependent on these types of innovators like Mark to really drive these efficiencies that we need by really rethinking the assumptions and really starting to question why we're doing what we're doing and if there's a better way of doing it.
Yeah, well said. In fact, somebody gave me a way of thinking about this many, many years ago. They said, think about the house as just a box and you're buying the box. And what are all the other costs associated with getting you into that box? Well, there is financing and fees and maybe appraisals and survey and so on. And they said very quickly, but relative to the price of the box, those costs are small. And yes, there's room to be much more efficient in those kinds of things. And even if you took 25% or 50% of the costs out from those items, you still have only moved the bar thousands of dollars, few $1,000s. You still have that big expensive box that you have to get the cost of down. And so that's what we're talking about here today. So with that said, and maybe you just answered it, but what struck you most in your exchange with him? I mean, when you walk away, what is it that if I say Marc Minor, what thought comes to mind for you?
What struck me the most is how Higharc is taking a different position of really enabling home builders to control the home building process, right? It's a complex process of processes that Marc has identified, and Marc is looking to empower those home builders to be able to control the process better. Users of that system, by being able to have better control over the process, they're now able to access the data better. We're able to drive decisions throughout the systems better. And so by having that control, I think is really going to be a huge leap forward in the home building industry. And I really hope this approach that Marc is taking will hopefully also be replicated, particularly in the multifamily process, which is similarly complex processes.
That's true. That's right. And it's no question that he talks about inefficiency time and again, because that's what he's saying is baked into the current system that he thinks needs to change. And, it really is, as we've already said in the few minutes we've been reflecting on the conversation, that things are still being done the same old way. And that same old way is very manual. So a lot of things are still happening manually. So not only is it isn't just outdated, it's really just not sustainable. We can't keep doing that.
Yeah, these manual processes, not only are they driving up costs because labor is getting more expensive, but it's really introducing opportunities for errors. When it's done manually, then there's going to be opportunities for errors, and it also prevents the opportunity to learn and to innovate. Going back to your comment, Egbert, of kind of the expensive big boxes, right? We recognize why processes are being repeated. That's because there's less risk in repeating what we've done previously. By trying to change that process, that is introduces new risk to the process, and the question becomes who carries that risk. And I think Marc is standing up and saying, let me be that first mover to help show how this can be done, demonstrate the new process, and then start to replicate it across the industry.
And Brian, when you think about that situation, Jordan, we have by some measure, you'd have to assume that years ago, call it 50 years ago, somebody was sitting down having this conversation with another person saying, okay, we need to improve this process because this is crazy. For 150 years, we've been building the same way. And yet, here we are 50 years later, looking back saying for the last 200 years, we've been building the same way. So do we really believe, in fact, I'll challenge you to answer the question, do you really believe that this kind of platform approach could be the game changer we need, and could it really shift how cities grow and evolve? I mean, or are we still just so bound by all old processes that 50 years from now we'll be sitting down having the same kind of conversation? Not you and me, but two other people will be sitting down having this conversation.
Yeah, right. As we think about a game changer, for me, I didn't realize this, but the home building industry delivers almost twice as many residential units across the United States on an annual basis, right? There's about 1 million single family homes built via the home building industry, whereas the multifamily industry is around 500,000. So it is a much larger problem we as an industry face when we think about housing affordability. So by having Higharc kind of empower these home builders to better control the systems, drive efficiency, learn better, and accelerate timelines, I do believe that this platform they put together will help address some issues of housing affordability, and definitely will hopefully even inspire other innovators within the home building industry and potentially multifamily industry to take a step forward and to also take on this risk and try to push forward new ways to build.
Yes, in fact, the multifamily rental industry will have to change because the density for single family is so low. That's a lot of land that gets consumed. Somewhere along the line, the land constraints will force you to have to be going vertical and in greater density. And the question is, at what point do you have transferable disruption happening in both the home building and the multifamily rental? When given what Marc is doing and how much of a disruptor he is being to the industry, he's a humble guy. That was something worth admiring. But he's also listening, because that's what his disruption is, in direct response to what he's hearing out there and perhaps also seeing out there in the industry. And so he understands that local context is not just important, it's actually essential. So his 2 ears instead of 1 mouth comes into play. He's clearly using both ears in shaping what it is he's undertaking.
Yeah, I think for Marc, it really starts with respect. I think if technology enters a room thinking it has all the answers, then it's simply going to miss the mark. It's not going to be able to apply its efficiencies very well. So if technology comes in kind of asking the good questions, learning about the community context, about equity goals, local policy, then I think technology can really be a true partner for us in these projects.
Yeah. So, all right. So how does a company like Higharc, how should they approach partnerships with mission-driven developers like Integral and a lot of others out there? How do they approach those developers? Because it's one thing to talk to a commercial real estate shop, but it's another thing to actually talk to developers that are already inside of a mission discussion. How can they ensure that they're adding value without losing sight of community needs, right?
Yeah, I think it's Higharc recognizing that what they're bringing forward isn't just their code base of their platform. It's really how they think about how they can go about integrating within the mission of mission-driven developers and helping provide momentum and empowering and enabling people that are already doing the work on the ground. For me, Higharc's approach to how they're thinking about their tool and their platform reminds me a lot of kind of how we think about approaching community development, right? We all have the skill sets, the experience, and the expertise to do what we do, but we recognize that we can't just step into a community and develop. We have to really understand what the community wants to see. We have to understand how our public partners can support us through this process. And so Higharc is really kind of appears to be taking that similar path and that framework that we're doing to make sure they're serving the home building industry by really listening and partnering and improving how that industry is doing what it's great at doing.
That good observation. Absolutely. In fact, Jordan, as I went through this, there's one point Marc made that stuck with me. I don't know if I'm saying this verbatim, but pretty close to. It was that if the building process itself is broken, as it has been all this time, if the building process itself is broken, then solving the affordability crisis will always feel out of reach. So, in effect, until we fix the broken process of home building, you'll always be screaming and fighting to address affordability because the system is not delivering the most efficient product. So there's always going to be evidence of the dysfunction and dislocation that comes from the costs are too high, it takes too long to build, and all those things build on each other and make it difficult. So we'll always have a crisis of affordability, and it'll always be out of reach until you fix the core issues best reflected in a refined or improved delivery system.
Agreed. We need to focus on improving these systems. Cost alone are a reflection of kind of the status and the health of the overall system. And so to do so, we really need innovators like Marc that are willing to take those risks, push forward their ideas. The investment committee also responding accordingly and kind of making bets and investments in these innovators, and the partners that are willing to innovate, to implement these innovations into their practices. So it really takes this ecosystem of different partners to really go about improving the system that we need to be implemented much better.
Yeah, and you talked about the innovation just then, and the reality is everybody says, oh, innovation is important to us, even when they're not innovating. And so the question is, when do we stop talking about innovation like it's something else and just not part of the norm? It has to really become part of the norm that you're constantly in a mindset of innovation rather than it's how you distinguish one firm from another. One is innovative and the other is not. Well, the industry should force us all to live in a state of constant innovation or improving the processes. So the question is, how do we shift the industry to adopt smarter, more equitable practices consistently by being in a constant state of innovation?
Correct. We need to stop treating innovation as a luxury and start treating it as kind of that necessity to what you're talking about, because the system itself is broken. We know it's broken. It's being repeated over time. All the other conditions of the system are changing. Our material costs are going up. Our labor costs are going up. Our interest rates are going up, but the system has not adjusted. So it's really needing to treat that innovation as a necessity there. And Marc's point really is, Marc's work is all about kind of calling to stop kind of patching the boat, so to speak, and just simply starting to build a new one from scratch. That we've learned how to do this over the last 100, 200 years, and it's time for us to stop repairing the boat. It's time for us to start from scratch and build a better boat that's more efficient and can help us get to housing affordability better.
Yes, and that's what that's the balance we're all striving for, right? Speed and scale, yes, no question, but with intention and a focus on real impact. So always working with the end in mind. Jordan, thank you very much for guiding such a meaningful conversation. We're living it every day. As you said at the outset, costs are higher, interest rates aren't moving down fast enough. And so if there's any time that we can see the crisis unfold in front of our eyes, it's now. And so I always have great, deep gratitude for people like Marc for showing us what thoughtful disruption looks like. And it's disruption that doesn't just shake things up and hope it ends up in a good place, but actually rebuilds with purpose. So thank you again, and thanks to Marc for his time and for you for leading that conversation.
Thank you, Egbert.
Next time on Create the Village.
When we see a worthwhile project and yet it doesn't work economically, we dig in and try to figure out where the tools are in the toolbox.
Create the Village is produced by Felicia Ann 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗁 and Chantrell Brewer. Executive producer Rick White. It's edited by Brennan Robinson. Create the Village is a production of the Integral Group LLC, copyright 2025.